Hey, Wednesday. We got so for all y'all joining us and watching right now, I said to Dean when we came on this one, I said, dude, that is a crazy spaceship background in the background. He says, no, that's the sleeper cabin in my Peterbilt. So do you guys remember when Dean was in his Peterbilt? That is like
Yeah.
super cool. It kind of looks like the Millennium Falcon. I'm
I
all
love
over
it.
it. Awesome, man. So
Takes
today is going to be a really good day. Today we're going to talk about automobile alley, how a drought on one end of the country impacts the other end of the country, and the love and marriage, the good old Al Bundy from Married with Children of logistics.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
So,
We got Jeff is the winner this
somebody's
morning.
either still in meditation or yoga right now, but Jeff
Joy.
is up there.
and then we're followed very quickly by Damon. Good morning, Jeff. Good
Damon's
morning,
on.
Damon.
Wow.
Dean, yesterday when we first started talking about this,
Yeah.
pretty crazy what's happening with the southern blockades of the border, how they're impacting all the other manufacturers. I started thinking about it last night, and when we look at some of the major milk runs, like the companies like Magna and all the Magna companies run, right, starting in Laredo,
Right.
and literally
Right.
picking up pallet after pallet after pallet all the way up through
Right.
Michigan, and then having another milk run going through Michigan. I remember when we started doing business with Magna a few years ago, looking at the scope of the automotive world, like, I'd done business with Chrysler and stuff, but it was more
Right.
truckload here, truckload there.
Mhm.
But when you look at the scope of the automotive world and
Right.
how the pieces move back and forth, like there is so many, okay, a door goes from here and it gets powder coated, and then it comes back to this plant to get something else put on it. Then it goes over here to get done. And then it goes over here to
Right.
get glass put in it. Then it goes over here for the actual like installation. The
Right.
movement inside the automotive world is insane. And what was it yesterday you said when we were
Yeah.
talking?
There were 60 auto manufacturing plants in Canada, and they owned 120 manufacturing plants in Mexico. So it's like 2 for 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So,
And that 2 for 1, when the border's being blocked and when you can't
Right.
get product in,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
already, if you look at just
Yeah.
the logistic nightmare we've had with automobiles over the last
Right.
year and a half,
Oh,
right?
it's
Transistor
crazy.
chips, then containers of transistor chips sinking because it's hitting chemical tankers, and then all the
Right.
derailments and all
Right.
this. It's insane what
Well,
we've had.
even the ship with all those high end, the Porsches and stuff that were on there. I mean, it's just been one after another.
The
It's
one
been
that
crazy.
was coming to
'cause,
Rhode Island. Yeah.
so you look at that, right? I have a friend of mine who ordered a Volkswagen e-Golf,
Right.
and he actually got called, and the salesperson said, "Do you know that the ship that went down with all the EVs on it?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, that was pretty much our annual inventory for Canada."
Wow.
So now, is Volkswagen going to make more? I don't know, but
Right.
the salesperson called him and told him that, and he you look at that, and we are what at this point I think we were almost 3 months into 2022,
Right.
meaning.
Right.
And so think of this impact for a second, right? Like as a consumer, it took me almost a year and a half to get my truck that I've been dying for. But let's look at even further, like how much further this goes down the pipe, okay? So if that is the case, just for Volkswagen's sake, right? So you have Volkswagen salespeople that need to feed their family. You have dealerships that need to make money to stay afloat, to be profitable. What's the overall long-term impact there? Right? Like let's take the consumer out of it. You need a new car. That's great. But just like pull that back for a second and look at the economic impact going forward, because one massive ship sank because of whatever. I mean, did they even find out what? I know it was an EV that caught on fire, but anyways, I think that's even
Yeah,
kind of
I don't
irrelevant,
even know.
right? So Canadian, he was told that was the Canadian inventory for the year of these vehicles. Now, think of that impact. So as a salesperson, if you have, 15 customers that are buying vehicles, 16 customers, even 30 customers, you're kind of 2 vehicles a month. That's kind of, 10, 12 grand a month in commission, because it's like $5,000-$6,000 a vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Gone. Like you've sold the vehicles, but now because of something else, and it's funny because as brokers, our image, credibility, and brand is on somebody else's back, the supplier's back, right? But out of no fault of your own, not choosing the wrong supplier, like nothing, your entire annual salary goes out the window. Like, and I mean, I know that's a real far case, but if you have no vehicles to sell, how are you going to make commission?
Right. Good point. Affects everybody.
Right? So Dean, but let's dig into it, because I know you have some staggering numbers to share about what's happening south and nuts. How it's impacting northern freight.
Hold on, we got to bring up Nerf real quick. Nerf thinks we're living
Nerfad, Now Dean is now in space for vacation. Man, you guys are living the life.
He's on top of SpaceX with
Elon. No, it looks like the Millennial Falcon back there, Dean. It's awesome, man.
It's a throwback to my days hauling freight overnight in Australia when I was sort of operating on another level, if you know what I mean.
Yes, sir.
This is interesting. I just threw this up this morning because I couldn't get my camera centered between the picture frame and the back of the hotel room here in Denver. So I went with the background. So, but I'm not sure what's more entertaining, listening to you guys talk or watching the comments in the channel. I just love watching it. It's so entertaining. But I'm worried about Lisa. I'm not sure where Lisa is. This is
I know. Now I'm starting to wonder. Lisa not talking. This is
unprecedented.
Maybe she took the day off. It's okay.
Maybe she's not doing yoga this morning. But so Dan, this is. I've been watching the rates. Remember we spoke on the show about the February blockades a while ago. We covered the floods in BC and how that disrupted supply chains, and spot rates went up and then they came back down. And the one thing that's caught my attention, even though rates, I had a look this morning on our national spot rates, we're down, dry van rates are down to $2.14 per mile this morning. That's line haul without fuel. The staggering number there is that's 63 cents a mile down this year alone. So they've dropped 63 cents a mile. It's just
in less than 120 days.
And it's got no sign of slowing down. Now, so we are forecasting that rates will bottom out at some point, and then produce season will start to put that sort of upward drag on rates, and then they normally go through the seasonal pattern until July 4, and then they, it's sort of a bump up, and then they come back down again into typical, peak freight season, September, October. Doesn't look like that's happening at the moment. There's no sign of the journey south stopping. It's even more for reefers. It's about 75 cents a mile down. They're dropping at about a clip of about 6 cents a mile per week. That's how fast rates are dropping. But the reason I say that is, even though national rates are dropping, that's the national average. And of course, within an average, there's lots of highs and lows and lots of opportunity for people who are looking to secure capacity. But on those lanes we talked about months ago after the February protests, you touched on Auto Alley. So if I look at Laredo to Toronto, it's the exact opposite and some. So this morning, remember we talked about the average rate on that Auto Alley lane from Laredo back to Toronto, averaged up until January, it averaged probably $1.50. So it's at $3.10 this morning. So it's double. Now, so it went up to $2.37. So it's up nearly 70 cents since February, since the protests. And it's still going up. And of course, now we've got protests and blockades last week on the southern border. So anybody that's looking to move freight between Canada and Mexico, there are lots of problems moving freight. There's obviously lots of tight capacity on those lanes. Even Detroit to Toronto. So it's that 234-mile lane that's heavily dominated by auto parts. It's at $1,200 a load this morning, excluding fuel. Wow. It averaged most of last year $650.
Yep. Well, I mean, remember I told you yesterday. So we were talking about the flatbed moves, and so we quoted a customer 35 to 40 loads a week. We quoted a customer tandem flats 6 weeks ago, and we added 17% margin on it. And then last week, Thursday, before I came down to Dominican, the customer said, okay, it's a go. We start Monday, literally this week, like 2 days ago. And I was like, okay, well, we need to requote. And so the price we had 6 weeks ago with 17% margin, our closest supplier at cost was $300 above that. So without even margin. So we're talking 17% plus $300 was our closest cost. So we requoted the whole project, and it was a 2-hour sell. Like it was literally where, have you ever had a sell so hard where you're sweating, and not from from nervousness, just from trying so hard. And it was like when I was sitting with my customer, it was like, okay, so here's the area. And I literally printed up a map of Michigan and I put it on PowerPoint, and I did this whole like circle graph thing. And I was like, and we had to pull from here. And we literally, and here's where, you know, months ago, I said, 2022 is the year of transparency, cost plus. So what I did is I said, listen, I said, Joe, here's the deal. This is my cost. Give me the ability to add 12%. I'll make it happen for you, 40 loads a week, no problem. And he looked at me and he says, you're going to give me the invoice? I said, I'll give you the invoices. And I said, if we can get it at a better price, buying at a better price without hindering service or relationship, I said, I'm all in. I said, I get it. Like, I mean, you're talking, so 17 plus 300. So on some lanes, we're talking a 33% increase in rate. 33% in not even 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And he was like, okay, if you're gonna do cost plus, I'm and here's the thing, just to give everybody a little context, and I know I said it yesterday on your show, Dean. I had dealt with this customer for almost 7 years now. I helped him at his old company achieve things the company has never achieved. They went from like 1.8 million in demurrage to zero. And we like really performed for this company. So the trust factor was there. Like, he believes in what I can do. And if I say it's you know, it's pink, he's like, go for it, make it happen. Even at that point, when I told him that number, I heard the doubt in his mind. I heard it. And it was like, listen, like, and again, that cost plus was the saving grace.
Right. Then, DJ, I saw a data point yesterday that was kind of interesting, and I think the broader point is that on some of these lanes, particularly flatbed, flatbed capacity is much tighter than dry van and reefer. So, you know, some of the pundits in the industry have been talking about, you know, using the words like bloodbath, you know, the Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the doom and gloom, all of that stuff. And that's only saying that because spot rates are dropping, without, you know, ignoring the fact that demand is actually showing signs of increasing. But in flatbed, it's quite the opposite. Rates are going up in flatbed, demand is high. But for you you've got to draw your carriers from a much bigger net, because flatbed carriers typically have a longer length of haul before they pick up loads, because a lot of their loads are project one-off projects, right? So it's not like they run dedicated. I mean, they do, but for a lot of carriers, there's a higher percentage of freight in the spot market. And I saw a data point yesterday that shows that right now in DAT's freight network, we're running at about, I'm going to look at the number here quickly, we're running at about 40% of the loads at the moment in the flatbed market are moving on spot. So it's like a 40-60 split. Whereas back in dry van, it's more like 85-15.
85 on the spot market, 15?
No, 85 contract, 15.
Oh, okay.
So in normal times, it's like 90-10, you know, as a rough guide. But in flatbed's the opposite of what's happening in dry van and reefer right now. So it's still a great market for flatbed carriers. Capacity is still very, very tight. So if anybody looking to secure capacity in flatbed, it's a very different story. That affects steel, all the steel and lumber production, all of those, any customer you've got that's looking to move anything on a flatbed. Even think about, you know, commodity prices are higher, right? So you just know that farmers are going to be buying a lot more machinery this year. So, you know, that tells you a lot about what demand for drop deck specialized trailers is going to be. So, you know, I think the flatbed's going to be a very different story this year than the dry van and reefer. There's going to be a lot of excess capacity in the latter two. Flatbed's a very different story because there's still a lot of volume moving on the spot market compared to the other two.
I've got a buddy that has 2 RGNs, small company just up in a local area where I am. Moves a lot of machinery, moves a lot of, you know, excavators and stuff for a lot of companies that do like house building and that kind of thing. His numbers have gone up 65%. Because I'm charging 65% more. And I said, is it not like at what? He goes, Dan, it's just, he goes, it is insane what's happening. He goes, and it's not, he goes, it's not necessarily me. He goes, the way this all started was, and again, he has 2 RGN. So the guy's not a massive company by any means. And he goes, like, I have one person saying, okay, for the next 3 weeks, I need you booked out every day. and they agree to a price. And somebody else calls him up and says, hey, listen, he goes, well, I got one truck. Well, I need two. He goes, well, I only have one, like one's dedicated. He goes, I'll double what they're paying.
Right.
And he's like, and he goes, Dan, you got to understand, like, I've got no dedicated customers, because we have the conversation about dedication and integrity and sticking with, you know, when you say yes to somebody. He goes, I've got no dedicated customers. He goes, the amount of times I get dropped by these companies when they find a better price is crazy. He goes, there's no loyalty on their end. Why would there be loyalty on my end? And I've got issues with that, because it takes two to tango, right?
Yeah.
But he says these guys are literally in a bidding war to get the excavators where they need to get them, because housing prices of housing is skyrocketing in Ontario. And he goes, the faster they build the homes, the faster they make their money. So they're putting like double the excavators at locations they're digging, and then they're moving them to the next location and digging it, as opposed to kind of just digging one, you know. And then he goes, like, it's insane what's happening. He goes, and they're outbidding themselves. He goes, one company, and I won't say the name, but he goes, one company, I had two people from the same office calling me, outbidding each other. Wow. And he goes, and finally, when I realized it, I go, hey, are you not working with this person? They go, yeah. He goes, well, you guys just outbid each other 3 times. That's like at a silent auction, you outbidding your buddy, right? Yeah, it's crazy. It's a race to the bottom. But let's get, we're missing a bunch of comments here. I apologize.
Yeah, Nerf's got a good comment there. I mean, he makes a great point, but I think the different reefer vans and dry vans are very interchangeable in terms of capacity. I mean, you can't go backwards from reefer. Yeah, Nafad. Yeah, so he makes a good point about the market correction, right? So I think he's right in that there is a market correction of, at the moment, it looks like unprecedented levels in terms of how the spot market's changing. So you can interchange between dry van and reefer, because they can, you know, a dry van can, a reefer can haul a lot of the same freight that dry van. They're very different with flatbed, right? Flatbed's highly specialized. It's a very different, as we said on the show yesterday, Dan, you've got to have the right angles, straps, chains, bits of carpet, rubber, friction matting. You have to have so much stuff with you just to haul flatbed. It's a very different market, and that's why I think it's going to be a very interesting market for flatbed carriers this year. But in the other market, guys, it's certainly in free fall at the moment. Even just for context, we looked at our contract side of our business yesterday. So DAT's contract market, it's about 40 billion in freight spend. And what was interesting from that, in the last quarter, freight volumes have dropped 9%. So freight volumes are declining. There's a slow downward trend in the volume of freight moving overall. And there is a shift away from the spot market back to the contract market, because contract rates are higher. So there's some shifts going on in the market that will affect capacity. I see a lot of loosening of capacity in the dry van and reefer market at the moment, as we measure it by the fall in spot rates. So there is a market correction. Nafad's right. We don't know where this ends. We don't know where the bottom is just yet, but we will find it soon. There's no question we'll find it soon. At least I hope so, for a lot of the carriers that have got a lot of money invested in older equipment.
Now, Dean, something else that we'd love to talk about today is the drought, and how that's impacting produce, and how the produce market is now shifting. And if you could share that, because I know quite a few people that watch and listen do work in produce markets, whether it be for dry van, reefers without reefers turned on kind of thing. So I think it's going to be of serious value to everybody.
Yeah, it's a good segue from the previous point, right, about how the market's correcting and that we're on a downward slide. We mentioned earlier that it normally bottoms out in April. April's normally that sort of transition point from the downward slope in spot rates to the upward trend towards Independence Day. That trend has been pretty solid for many, many years. It was a bit different last year. It was very different in 2020, of course. So this year we're waiting for that bottom to happen and produce market to pick up. But as you talked about with some of the disruptions in the supply chain, now we've got a drought that's been going on in California for the best part of 22 years. It's like a mega drought. And it's the last 3 years it's been incredibly severe. I know they had some storms this week, and I'm not sure that's enough to affect the water levels. But the federal water authorities have said to a lot of the farmers in the Imperial Valley, I think it is, or the Central Valley, that they're not going to get any water allocation. So effectively, what it's been meaning for a lot of farmers is they haven't been able to plant the volume of acres that they would have normally been able to plant for produce season. And why this is a pretty big deal, about 70%, 70, of our fruit and vegetable production comes from California every year. So that could impact us at the grocery store. But I think the bigger point, though, for those that are looking to be in the intermediary space or the asset space, produce volumes are probably going to be down this year. We're already seeing volumes down by about half what we'd normally expect to see out of the Golden State in early April. So that, so you can see now. Remember, this is the start. So we're not in the upswing yet. So the early trends show that there is an impact on the produce season in terms of the volume of loads moving out of markets like Fresno, for example. So now again, it's a market that's it's probably one of the biggest markets for flatbed carriers. We're still 3 months away from the July shipping peak in produce out of California, but the fact that farmers have been forced to fallow thousands of acres of land due to lack of water, when you read some of the media reports out of that area, many are expecting this year to be worse than last year in terms of production. So I'm just watching this market carefully because it's sort of the bellwether for the produce season. A lot of our produce comes out of there. A lot of our east-west and west-to-east trucking, moves on a lot of those teams that run out of that particular market in Fresno. It's a market that's fairly expensive generally to get freight moved out of because you've got to run quite a few miles to get in there with a reefer. Yeah. So right now, though, this is why I mentioned this. Capacity's been really, really loose on the West Coast, but it's showing signs of tightening. Now, again, this is kind of going against trend. If my previous statement was volumes are down, so you would expect that if volumes are down, then spot rates are probably down. Well, not the case. Last week out of Fresno, spot rates went up 5 cents a mile, but they've been dropping for the 3 weeks prior. So 1 week doesn't make a trend. I know that, but it's an interesting trend as we talk about where will the bottom be in the fall in spot rates. And now I start to see a little bit of life in the produce market out of the Fresno market, which is kind of my bellwether for the produce season. Rates are up 5 cents a mile, only to $2.30. That's line haul excluding fuel. Boston up 13 cents a mile to $2.19. Pretty flat on rates north to Seattle. But the point is that after reefer capacity has been loosening in Southern California for the last month, it looks like it's reversing course, but only upwards by a penny per mile. So that's about all we can say right now. It's certainly not the level of change in the spot rate direction that's going to mean we'll have a meaningful or a material impact on spot rates leading into Independence Day. My gut tells me it'll be pretty flat.
Dean, when you say things like how troubled that is, I immediately think of, I know a lot of Canadian carriers that count on the produce market,
right?
This season to make money. They count on it, and they drop all other freight to run produce out of California. Right. So many Canadian companies do it, with that kind of challenge happening, and God forbid, even if it's 30 or 20% less. You're at certain points, it's $13,000, $14,000, $15,000, $20,000 to run back to Canada, US. That's huge money for companies up here, and that creates huge problems because if a company is resting on that peak season, those 3 months to make massive amounts of money, and that doesn't come. That throws off the whole. Yeah,
because it's more of a demand. Like they just need it, so they're paying.
It's the big quarter. It's a money making quarter. Yeah.
And another question I have, which would be, I don't know where we would get this information, but being Canadian, right? Produce in the U.S. So do you sell it if you only have, call it 70% of the crop? Do you sell it close to far? Meaning, will there even be enough to what would come to Canada? And if there won't, then I say prices are going to double and triple to get it up here. Right. And which means then consumers already right now, our produce, because of COVID and all the supply chain issues, is garbage.
It's garbage. It's terrible. They're rushing everything. They're
and then what's going to happen now? Right? I'm dying for I'm dying for Ontario produce at September, August, September, when we actually have tomatoes and potatoes and all that in Ontario, because I'm just looking for flavor again. Even bananas I'm finding have zero flavor. It's crazy. Right. And now all these areas that we count on, we really do. We count on it. We see it when. So was it last year when Salinas, California had a major E. coli issue in the lettuce, and there was a lot of romaine lettuce? I think it was last year or the year before. We are a romaine lettuce family. We don't necessarily buy iceberg lettuce, we buy romaine lettuce. And I remember how difficult it was. Like there was another company and the stocks are like this big as opposed to, the Anti-Boy ones that are this big. And it's like one little blip here causes this huge tidal wave down here. It's crazy how it works.
We had the same with the frosts in Yuma, Arizona. In February and March, right? So that affected production. I mean, that's another for those that are looking to see where rates move in the spot market, in the refrigerated market. That's another one to watch because they've just closed down the Yuma, Arizona winter salad bowl production, moving those plants back to Salinas Valley. That just happened last week. I was fascinated by Church Brothers Farms. They run about 60 flatbed trailers and literally move the entire salad production plant twice a year between the two markets. So that means rates will change out of those markets. So your demand will fall off in southern Arizona, and it'll shift back to the Salinas Valley, where a lot of that iceberg lettuce comes from. But lots of change. I think, Dan, the point we covered last week is worth mentioning. Produce volumes are down about 20% compared to this time last year, but they're exactly where they were in all non-pandemic years. So we had a 37% jump in produce volumes as the pandemic hit because people were cooking at home, ordering online, going out less. We're now seeing the mask mandate's been dropped. We're now on planes in particular, restaurants. People are going back out to restaurants more, and lo and behold, produce volumes drop right back down to pre-pandemic levels for March. And what that tells me is we're going back to the office, back to work, back to restaurants, and the mix of produce is changing for carriers and brokers in particular. So you have different packaging. Fresh has a different packaging mix. More so than you have to have for online retail, which is much smaller. Types of packaging. So you're going to see lots of changes, I think, back to normal. And that's why I sort of think that what we're seeing in the truckload market is more of a return to normal than we are this sort of cataclysmic crash. And but normal is problematic for some carriers because they've geared up too much. We've had, you'll know that on this show that I've been saying we've always had enough trucks. They were just tied up on docks where there weren't enough staff. Well, lo and behold, when was the last time you heard someone talk about the driver shortage in the media?
It's been a while. It's been a little while.
We've never had a driver shortage. We've just had a shortage of people that are, certainly loading and unloading trucks. We've always had enough trucks. We've always had enough drivers. We have a massive retention problem. Keeping drivers employed is a really big issue. But we've got enough trucks right now to meet demand. It looks like we've got too many trucks now to meet demand because demand is decreasing because we're going back to more normal shipping volumes. So that's going to be a trend that we need to watch in the coming weeks. I think that's what we're seeing in the freight market is more of a correction, but reverting back to normal as opposed to the big, the big bust cycle we saw in 2019.
Now, do you think that a lot of this conversation that people are having is because since for 2 years now, call it at least, well, what are we, 2022? We're kind of quarter one. So at least 2020 and 2021. So two years and a bit. Yeah. There's been this major increase in everything. And that is now kind of what we consider the norm, as opposed to looking back at 2017, 18, even into 19. I mean, 18 was an anomaly because of ELD. And I know even when you and I met, Dean, a lot of the big players in the trucking industry were like, listen, you cannot take 2018 as a guideline for anything. It was such a blip that you just got to kind of wipe it out. You got to go like 16, 17, 19, and they were hoping 20, which then turned into another big blip. But do you think that we as logistics professionals, maybe because we've been in this so long, it's like you almost because I kind of forget, and as crazy as it sounds, like I forget what it was like in 2017, which was probably the last normal year we've seen in the last 5 is 2017.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what it was like, and call it horrible, but it's like we think the norm is what happened in the last 2 years because this is, everybody kept saying, oh, the new norm, and it's like. I think it's reverting back, and it'll show us what that was.
Yeah, and I think another thing to think about, Dean, and I don't know how much it'll affect. You'll probably know more of this than I would, but you mentioned things going back to normal because of the mask, restaurants, and those kind of things. But I think also because of that, because of those restaurants, they're going to start to open up. A lot of them minimize their menus, really downsize their menus. If they start adding more stuff, what does that do as well? I think that's
and hard to get staff. DJ, it's still hard to get staff. I'm here in Denver. They are still struggling to open up. We're remember what we said back in 2020, the reopening of the economy was much harder than the lockdown because we went from 0 to 100 miles an hour.
Yes.
We've always been saying that this summer will be a sort of a transition point as we move back to more spending on services than goods, but we are going back to normal at warp speed, and companies I think are really struggling to open up. We've still got lots of supply chain disruptions. Dan's spot on about what's going to go on this year. We're still going to see a lot of disruptions in terms of just getting things where they need to be. And now we've got this wrinkle that's been thrown into the mix in Asia with the lockdown over there. So we're going to see that play out in port markets all across the country. We're still a long way from our supply chain being stabilized, which is, of course, going to impact all of us trying to move freight around.
Yeah.
Well, then awesome. There are those pictures floating around of the port over there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The number of vessels.
I see Jeff shared one. I've seen a few different ones, and it's just
it's crazy. It blows your mind. It really does, right? How it can go from like the immediate flip of it's crazy. It's crazy. And then also then you add to Houston that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is obviously adding to the congestion and the rates coming out of Texas and all that.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting, Dean. We'll follow this closely over the next couple of weeks, and then for everyone watching and listening, we're going to keep bringing you that frontline news and frontline information. But if you're looking at the produce season, now's the time to start talking to your customers down there and finding out what kind of volumes they're expecting and everything. Because now, if you count on the produce season in order to give you a big spike in revenue, start having the conversations. Because again, Dean, we talked about how many times have we on this show brought up a point, DJ, and we've said, salespeople, go out and talk to your customers.
Right.
And I have had numerous people come back to me and say, I wish I would have listened because I wouldn't be in this position.
So we got the mad scientist of logistics right here. I mean, come on.
So this is a good point, right? Because even though reefer capacity is loosening rapidly nationally and rates are down 75 cents a mile year to date, it's just like flatbed, right? Flatbed's highly specialized. You've got to have the right equipment, the right carriers in the right space at the right time. It's no different than produce season. If you need a team to have freight delivered into Hunts Point, New York out of Salinas, California, you've got to find a team who can haul, and get there in 48 hours or whatever the time frame is. So again, it's a niche market. It's only serviced by specialized carriers. They've got to have good reefer equipment. They've got to have the best drivers, the best equipment, and they run cross country back and forth. That's not for everybody. That's just not a normal reefer capacity. So again, in particular lanes, when you're buying capacity or you're brokering freight or you're looking to solve logistical problems, certain lanes are going to provide a lot of opportunity for all of the players in the equation, not just sort of getting tied into this overall mantra that the market is collapsing. I think it's going to be the opposite on certain lanes where they're highly specialized.
Love and marriage.
Yeah,
comes together like a horse and carriage. They're good old Al Bundy. DJ, what do you got to take us out of here, brother?
Yes. Hey, thank you all again for joining us. All the comments, you guys, thank you. Lisa, we seen you come in late. You gotta redeem that next time. Jeff took the spot, but thank you, Dean, as always, and Dan. But Dean for joining us here every Wednesday, guys. If you want the crystal ball, if you want what would be the crystal ball, join us Wednesdays. You'll listen to Dean. He'll make you sound like a superstar to your customers. So thank you, Dean, as always, for joining us. And everybody, Monday through Friday, Wednesday, 9 a.m. till 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Start your day right with us. Get the information. Get it right. Get motivated. Get energized. Thank you to Damon and American Logistics Centurion Trucking, as always, for making this possible.
Thanks,
and
David.
Quote I got for us to go out today, I had to go with data because, it's Dean.
It's Wednesday.
It is a new world.
In the end, you should only measure and look at the numbers that drive action, meaning that data tells you what you should do next.
Right,
listen to the numbers, guys.
Yes. Well done.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance.